This set of cinema lenses is incredibly sharp wide open, has almost no focus breathing whatsoever, and is almost perfectly color matched throughout the range. This is a set of key features that I've not seen in any budget cinema lenses anywhere near this price point. And throughout this video, I'm going to talk about these lenses, but I'm also going to compare it in some ways to what you might see out of the Sirui Nightwalker series of cinema lenses, as well as 7Artisans' own Vision series of lenses, because these lenses are all found at a very, very similar price point, but I think developed with completely different philosophies. At the time of shooting this video, there has been some confusion on the final pricing of the lenses, but I am told it will be similar to the Sirui Nightwalker or the 7Artisans Vision lenses, and I will put some links in the description down below, which should have some accurate pricing at the time of watching this video. I think with these two previous budget cinema lenses, the goal was to just give as much bang for your buck as they possibly could. And for that reason, you've got one of them that's a T1.0 maximum T-stop, and the other one is a T1.2 maximum T-stop. The problem with this is, in order to achieve those numbers or those maximum T-stops at the price point that they were at, there were a number of sacrifices that had to be made, potentially in build quality and in optical performance. All the range of tests that you would put a set of lenses through, this new set of lenses exceeds those other two at the expense of starting at T2.1. The lenses are going to come in 5 focal lengths: a 10mm, a 16mm, a 25mm, 35mm, 50mm, and 85mm. Now, in full disclosure, these lenses were sent out to me at no cost to myself. I'm under no obligation to say anything, and this is not a paid or sponsored video. And I'm just going to take you through the series of tests that I've run on these lenses so you can see the optical performance of the different lenses throughout the set. I'll also talk about the set as a whole, because you can buy the whole set, and it comes with a nice little carrying case as well. And starting with the build and handling on the lenses, you will notice that the iris and the focus gears all line up, which is typical for cinema lenses. These are no different, and that's the way it should be. In a perfect world, I would love for all these cinema lenses to be the exact same size and weight. That is not the case. There is a variation in both size and weight. It is not very significant. If you've got them on a gimbal, you will need to adjust the gimbal moving from one lens to another in some situations, but there's a lot of situations where you wouldn't. And if you're just using a standard rig and you're not on a gimbal, I think the size difference is not going to make much of a difference. As you can see in front of me, the lenses come in both silver and black. For whatever reason, 7Artisans thought it would be fun to send me half of each. So I've got half silver, half black, which is a bit weird to have a set with mixed colors. But that's not obviously what you would do. You would choose between the silver or the black. They do have fluoro lettering on them that reacts to black light or UV light, so that will glow instead of dark environments. I find that even in the dimmest conditions, I can read the lettering on the lenses, and the actual numbers for T-stops and your focus distance are engraved as well. So it's recessed, so those shouldn't rub off over time. This is something that even on some more expensive cinema lenses I have is not the case. I would also say that across the entire set, the dampening of the focus and the iris is very well dampened. It's very smooth, and it's also reasonably consistent across the entire set of lenses I've got, bar I think the 16mm, which is a little bit stiffer, but they are certainly more consistent than other budget cinema lenses that I have tested. They are Super 35 or APS-C coverage lenses, and they come in Sony E-mount, Fuji X-mount, Canon RF, and Micro Four Thirds mount. One of the most important qualities of any cinema lens is the control of focus breathing. And that's because having this kind of control of manual focus that we use in movies is commonly used to do focus pulls from someone who is near to far or far to near. This allows you to maintain a specific framing and actually change where the viewer is looking based on changing the focus. But if you have a lens that has heavy focus breathing, that pull from focus near to far or far to near can end up looking like a crash zoom. It can take the person or the viewer out of the moment, and it ruins the effect of a focus pull. And some of the cheaper cinema lenses out there, although in theory they are supposed to have well-controlled focus breathing, even when the manufacturers say they do, often don't. And really using a focus pull in video is almost not a thing you can do because it does look like a crash zoom. Across this entire range of lenses, the focus breathing is somewhere between none and very little. And in any practical situation, you are not going to see any focus creep whatsoever. I consider this performance perfect, and it's the best performance I've seen out of lenses of this price point. Another optical trait that most cinema lenses have is some level of distortion. And for whatever reason, I feel like when it comes to cinema lenses or video lenses, people care less or worry less about distortion than they do with photography lenses. So I expected to see some amount of barrel distortion in some of these lenses, maybe some pin cushion in the 85 millimeter. But what I found is there is virtually no distortion whatsoever. I mean, even on the 10 millimeter lens, it is incredible how well balanced and how straight the lines are, even when you're looking for it. So I'm not even sure why they put that kind of effort into the distortion correction in a budget set of cinema lenses, because it's not even something that people seem to worry about. But distortion control in the lenses is essentially near on perfect. Looking at vignette, you do have some minor vignette through a number of the lenses, but for the most part, it's very, very minor, not something you would notice or ever even have to correct. The one exception to that is the 10 millimeter, which does have reasonably heavy vignette. And beyond that, I actually found that the 10 millimeter at T2.1 did seem darker than the other lenses, as if the vignette was so heavy that it was almost going all the way to the center of frame and creating a darker image. So either the 10 has extremely heavy vignette, which it definitely does, or T2.1 on the 10 millimeter is not T2.1, which I suspect is also a possibility. Looking at chromatic aberration performance, if we look at high contrast scenes and look for color fringing on the edges of high contrast scenes, there is virtually no color fringing whatsoever across the entire range. Now, starting at a maximum T-stop of T2.1 is very helpful with this. And when we look at lenses that go to T1.05 or T1.2, they're obviously pushing the boundaries, and the chances of getting chromatic aberration in those lenses is much greater. But the nice thing about these lenses when it comes to chromatic aberration is you can shoot them all at T2.1 and you never have to worry, is this that lens? It's got a little bit of chromatic aberration wide open. Should I stop it down a little bit? Looking at longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is chromatic aberration in the out of focus areas before and after the plane of focus, it is extremely well controlled, but some lenses do exhibit a little bit of it more than others. It's still probably the best performance I've seen of cinema lenses at this price point, and I would say it's significantly better than the other two budget cinema lens offerings that I talked about earlier in this video, but it is not quite as clinical as the in-focus chromatic aberration performance, and there is a chance that you will see some color fringing in out-of-focus areas, particularly if they are heavily backlit. Just keep in mind that there are lenses that are far exceeding this price point that have similar performance to this. I found that the flare performance in these lenses varied somewhat widely depending on what focal length you were using. With the wider focal lengths, there seemed to be a lot better flare control, and you really didn't get much artifacting. As you went up in the focal distance or had longer focal lengths, you actually got some really interesting rainbow and artifacting and interesting flares. Now, what I want to say about flare, when it comes to cinema lenses, if we were talking about photography lenses here and we saw some interesting flares, we would say this was a terrible performance. But it is not uncommon, even with high-end cinema lenses, that having interesting flares is a desirable trait, and you will see this in many of your favorite movies. And I think these lenses actually strike a reasonably good balance. I think when they do flare, it is interesting. I think you can control the flare reasonably well. If you use a matte box, use a flag, you can probably keep that flare down. But if you're somebody that's interested in interesting and fun and cinematic style flare, then I think particularly higher up the focal range, 35, 50, and 85 millimeters, you're going to get some interesting flare that you're happy with. And at the lower focal lengths, you're going to get really very little flare at all. Interesting, the lenses across the entire set have a kind of a superpower that I did not expect. And that is the close focus ability of all the lenses is far closer than I think you will see in most other lenses, particularly at this price point, or really cinema lenses in general. So I don't know if they made special effort to get a closer minimum focus distance on these lenses. But if you are shooting cinematic video and you want to shoot some close-up scenes, cooking or detail or an animal or something, a close up of somebody's face, of their eye or their mouth. These lenses really do render some incredible close-up image quality, and probably one of the strongest performance factors across the whole range is sharpness. And I did some test chart shots, something I don't normally do with cinema lenses. I did some real world shots, and I was really trying to determine, hey, are some of these lenses sharper than others? And as I went through the different photos and videos, I think, yes, I think probably some lenses are sharper than others, but I was going back and forth, and it became so close that it was really hard to tell. And given that you're using manual focus lenses, you're probably more likely to miss focus by a little bit than you are to actually have an image that's soft because the lens doesn't render the detail that you want. So across the entire range, you're going to get very, very sharp images. And unlike some other budget sets where you'll have one lens that is significantly sharper than another, which means that you're in a given situation and you're thinking about shooting a scene, and you're not only trying to think of what's the right focal length, you're trying to think about, hey, which of these lenses is sharp wide open? That's not something you're going to have to think about with all these lenses. They are all plenty sharp enough wide open. Looking at the bokeh and background blur, you're going to get similar high quality bokeh throughout the range. You're not going to get any onion ringing on any of them. You do get some slight texture on the bokeh balls. The bokeh is generally round with a nice highlight outline around the edges. There is a bit of a geometry when some of them they're stopped down to a certain part, but they're much better than many other budget cinema lenses and better than a lot of expensive lenses I've used. And the 50 and the 85mm have slight cat's eye shape at the edge of frame, which I actually kind of don't mind, and it gives a little bit of a swirly bokeh effect. But overall, I've got no problem with the background blur or bokeh coming out of these lenses. Now, the color match on a set of cinema lenses is very important. This allows you to take one lens off, swap scenes, leave the settings in the camera exactly the same, and when you put the next lens on, you know that the colors are going to match exactly. And with budget cinema lenses, this is the one place that they almost always fall short. And not by a little, often just by so much. They're all over the place. And you really are either going to have to spend a lot of time in editing to get those colors right when you go between the two, or you're going to have to figure out what settings you need to put in the camera and adjust it every time you switch the lens. These lenses had a very interesting performance. If we look at the 50, the 35, the 16, and the 10, they were all virtually identical to each other, and the color match between those lenses was by far the closest I've ever seen in budget cinema lenses. But then we had the 85mm, which was off by about 200 Kelvin, which at this price point I considered acceptable but not ideal. And then we had the 25, and the 25mm is potentially a deal breaker for a lot of people. In the lens set that I've got, the 25mm was 400 Kelvin warmer. It made the images look nothing like the images coming out of any of the other lenses. And what this meant is it was 400 Kelvin warmer than the other lenses, which were all the same, but then it was 600 Kelvin warmer than the 85mm. This means that this lens did not match at all. Now, my hope is that is only because I have a new set of lenses or a demo set of lenses, and I did reach out to 7Artisans and I was like, hey, is this going to be a thing? Because this kind of doesn't make sense that these other ones so perfectly match and this one is so far off. And I really struggled to get a clear answer. The only answer I did get is for the final production models, the plan is that they're going to have a target Kelvin temperature, and they don't expect that temperature to be outside of that target by 100, either above or below. If they get that result, I think that is fine for a set of lenses at this price point. If they continue to release a 25mm that is 400 Kelvin warmer, I would struggle to recommend this set if you're planning on using the 25mm, because that is just so far off. So if it wasn't for that horrible color shift in the 25mm, these would be such easy lenses to recommend. It would just be an absolutely no-brainer. Across the board, the performance is absolutely clinical and far exceeds the price point. And you could just throw the lens on, you'd have color match, you'd have sharpness, you'd have chromatic aberration control, good flare control, you'd have a completely clinical performance out of a budget lens, something we haven't seen before. But that huge shift in color temperature in the 25 does complicate things, and I think ultimately If they sort that out, then I think I can highly recommend this set of lenses. If they don't sort that out, well, I think maybe it's over to you and you really need to make up your own mind on how important that 25 millimeters is, or dealing with that huge color shift in one of the lenses in the set.